Hey everyone, and welcome to a new episode of He's Not Wrong. I'm your host, Chad D. If you've ever wondered why some neighborhoods flood every time it rains, or why some blocks feel 10 degrees hotter than others just a few miles away, today's guest has spent his entire career answering exactly those questions and doing something about it. My guest is Dr. Sacoby Wilson, a professor in the Department of Global, Environmental, and Occupational Health and the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at the University of Maryland College Park School of Public Health. He also directs the Health, Environmental, and Economic Justice Lab, where he and his team dig into the intersection of public health, frontline community, city planning, and extreme weather. Dr. Wilson has spent years showing how the map of environmental risk in this country lines up again and again with the map of race and income. Communities of color are more likely to live in neighborhoods with less tree coverage and more pavement, creating urban heat islands where surface temperatures can far exceed the air temperature just a few blocks away. Those same communities are more likely to flood thanks to a lack of green space to absorb water, and they're already paying a higher share of their income on energy bills, leaving little room to absorb what's coming next. And what's coming next is a big part of why I wanted to talk to Dr. Wilson. Data centers are rapidly expanding across the country, and Dr. Wilson has been outspoken about the risk that they pose to the very communities already carrying the heaviest environmental burden. He recently wrote an op-ed for the Baltimore Sun, making the case that protecting Maryland's most vulnerable residents isn't just about equity. It's about making the whole state more resilient. Before we get started, I want to make sure that you know about a conference that Dr. Wilson is a part of hosting, the EJ 2076. Make America Just Again, a 50-year plan to advance democracy, environmental justice, and health equity. It's happening September 14th through the 16th virtually, and September 17th through the 19th in person. This is the annual EJ Symposium hosted by the CEEJH, one of the largest environmental justice conferences in the country. It's been running since 2012, and it's where impacted residents, community leaders, researchers, and policymakers come together for keynotes, solidarity tours, cultural night, and more. A lot of the coalitions and legislative wins that you hear about in this space trace back to conversations that started at this event. Registration is now open. There are links in the show notes. Go check it out. Now, without further ado, please welcome Dr. Sacoby Wilson. Dr. Sacoby Wilson, welcome to He's Not Wrong. Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. This episode is so timely because I feel like with so much of what we see in the news is focused on data centers and the impacts that they're going to have on the environment. A lot of people, specifically here in Alabama, where I'm located, people in rural communities are speaking out about data centers and the impact of them. We're going to get into that. But first off, I just want to ask you how you began your work in the environmental field and how that relates to the advocacy work that you do. Because the audience has heard your resume. Like, you have done impressive work with bringing environmental racism to the forefront of conversation in people's minds.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. So I'm from Mississippi, so from Vicksburg, Mississippi. So growing up, I lived near, environmental like hazards or uses that, you wouldn't want to live by. A major highway, sewage treatment plant. My mom always reminded me, don't forget the landfill. So like we weren't like fence line, like right, because you have this term called fence line. We're right at the fence line of operation, but we're like, within half a mile of operation. So every morning on the bus, we would drive by these operations. And of course, with all the traffic, now where I'm in Vicksburg, there's not like being in DC with like all the traffic, but still you have a highway, by your house.
Yeah.
So, that kind of informs, why I do the work that I do. And then, I actually undergrad, I went to Alabama Agricultural Mechanical University.
Yeah.
So, up in Norman, in Huntsville. So was in environmental sciences, was doing like work in biology and ecotoxicology, which is really just looking at how chemicals can impact ecosystems, just to define it for everybody.
Yeah.
And so really got engaged and exposed to environmental issues and stuff like the Emil, Alabama landfill issue, something I learned about as an undergrad, and just really got engaged in understanding like just how the environment can impact human health through various programs while at A&M. So that's part of the reason why I am where I am today.
That is absolutely amazing. I'm so happy that you have experience in the South and in Alabama, because if anyone's going to come on here and talk about it, I'm happy it's you, because you understand
Yeah,
what people in Alabama are experiencing and have experienced. And one thing that I really want to lay out for everyone is a clear definition as to what environmental racism is. I feel like we need a level set and have a clear
yeah,
definition in this episode, because it's we like I said, we hear about data centers, we have all these topics that are discussed in the news, but they never actually talk about what it is that people are going through. They never talk about what's systemic that's keeping people sick or affecting people negatively. And so I feel like
yeah.
having this term defined is really important for the audience right now, because it might be their first time hearing about it.
Yeah, so let me kind of to help level set. You have a term environmental justice, right? So they may
Sure.
not heard that term environmental justice. So that speaks scientifically, well, from a social movement part of it. You have some communities because of race, class, that tend to be overburdened by environmental hazards and locally wanted land uses. Like chemical plants, landfills, as I mentioned before. It could be large factories, coal-fired power plants, gas-fired power plants. So they have more. They have more of those uses, and they're disproportionately impacted by pollution. Think about health issues like asthma, heart disease, cancer because of those exposures. Scientifically, we're talking about having more of these hazards and being exposed to chemical mixtures that can impact respiration, that can impact your heart, that can impact brain development, that can impact reproduction, right? So
Yeah.
that's environmental justice. We always like to say it's a movement, and on a social movement, so it's about where we live, where we work, where we play, where we pray, where we learn. I'm from Mississippi. I said it fast. I'll slow it down. It's about where we live, where we work, where we play, where we pray, where we learn, right? Now, environmental racism is a term that's really about how some communities are targeted because of their race to host these types of uses. So classically, when you think about environmental justice, environmental racism, you look at like a lot of the oil and gas infrastructure, for example, from extraction to processing to transport to processing, whose communities tend to be overburdened. Not saying that it's only in black communities, but they tend to be overburdened. On average, you have
Yeah.
more of those facilities in these communities, right? And so they tend to be targeted because of their race. And as one of the leaders of the movement, Dr. Bullitt, says, some people have the complexion for protection, and some people don't, or they have more power to stop these facilities from being brought in, and some folks do not.
That is so important about people having the power to have their voices heard, and stopping stopping companies and organizations, whoever, from coming in and bringing these dangerous facilities into communities in Alabama specifically. And I just got back from a content creator conference in DC, and so like
Okay.
this is the like fifth day in a row where I've been talking about this topic specifically, and it's so important that people know this, about how in like
Yeah.
Alabama you have these rural communities
Yep.
that are often forgotten in a lot of ways. But back
Yep.
in 2010, the Secretary of State closed DMVs, so they
Yep.
can't access. They don't have the resources or the access to get the ID that they're passing laws to require you to vote. So they're
Exactly.
literally being disproportionately affected to be kept out of the polling places, to
Exactly.
not have a say, and having people who could hold these companies accountable.
Accountable. Yes, sir. It's not a poll tax, but in one it's a type of old school poll tax. If so,
Yes.
anybody knows the history of the South and what poll taxes look like, and then your point about rural communities. Let me just slow down a little because I do talk fast. So let me just slow down a little bit. So you think about, to your point about rural communities. You are a rural community in Alabama or in Mississippi, because that's where I'm from. Those are my two
Yep.
states, two like home states in some ways, right?
Yeah.
You don't have a lot of economic opportunity, right? You may have limited access to healthcare. You may have limited access to. We're talking about AI and data centers. So your technology infrastructure, your IT infrastructure, right? Your Wi-Fi infrastructure. That's an issue. And in many places, you still have folks who don't have paid roads, who don't have sewer and water infrastructure, publicly regulated sewer and water. They're still on well water. They're on septic tanks. You go to Uniontown, Alabama, where when you flush your toilet, your waste goes to a sewage treatment plant. When they flush their toilet, their waste, as a few years ago, was going to a containment pond and was spraying human waste on the ground.
Yep.
Or you go to Lowndes County, Alabama, where Catherine Flowers work, where people have straight piping of
Yes.
waste onto the ground. This is in America of 2026. We have this when people don't have access to what we call basic amenities. So go ahead, Chad. Go ahead.
I was gonna say I'm so happy that you brought up Catherine Flowers because she wasn't in my show notes, but I adore her. Her brother, I grew up in Montgomery, Alabama. I live in Birmingham,
Yeah.
and her brother was our next door neighbor
Okay, cool.
in Montgomery. And so I've been a follower of her work for so long, and the advocacy that she did for those rural communities, it was so important. And then you see the Trump administration come in, and one of the first things that they do when he takes office the second time is defund the projects that she
Yep.
worked so hard to get
Yep.
funding for, just to have a standard for quality of life in those places. And the
Yeah.
administration came in and said, no, clean drinking water, having a standard health
Exactly.
is not like, I mean, I pisses me
It,
off, and I could use more colorful
it's
language right now.
shocking. It's shocking the number of people in this country who don't have access to safe drinking water. But a lot of that, you see that in the South, where you have extreme infrastructure disparities and extreme poverty, and its history, to your earlier question, of environmental racism. So in some of my work, I know we haven't talked about data centers yet, but in some of my
We're
work
getting
in
there. We're getting there.
yeah, some of my work in North Carolina, I worked with a group called the West End Revitalization Association as a grad student at UNC Chapel Hill. And it's a similar issue where these folks had sewer and water lines that ran through their community, but they weren't connected. Right. So you have a big issue in this country. I know we talk a lot about the Flint water crisis. You look at Jackson, Mississippi with the water crisis a few years ago, right? You have these water crises across the country, but we have a big issue with infrastructure in urban areas, sewer and water infrastructure in rural areas. I'm working in a community in Nanjamore, Maryland. This is another, and I'm kind of connecting the dots for the audience. Many communities I'm talking about are historic kind of Black communities. In many cases, you think about freedmen's communities. After slavery, you had the freedmen settlements. Nanjamore, they're another community that they don't have sewer and water, and then you have people who are using porta potties. So this is happening in this country today. So in rural communities, semi-urban communities across the country, where folks do not have sewer and water, folks do not have access to healthcare infrastructure, folks getting emergency services. It was going to take 30 minutes to get an ambulance to come to your home if you have a heart attack, right?
Not worse than that in some places here in Alabama. They're closing rural hospitals at such high rates that if you have a heart attack for something that should be preventable or treatable, depending
Yep.
on when it happens, it's now a death sentence for some people because they can't make it to a hospital in the amount of time that they need to in order to receive life-saving care. That is
So
how bad it is in some parts of Alabama.
so you have a heart attack. You may not make it because the ambulance has to get to the nearest hospital. It may take you an hour and a half to get there.
Yes.
You have a stroke, right? You have some type of adverse health event. Under normal conditions, if you have the access to the healthcare infrastructure, they can save your life. So basically, we're not with these rollbacks, with the shutting down these hospitals, with the fact that people don't have access to care. These are death sentences that we're giving
Yes.
folks.
And it doesn't have to be that way. That's one thing I covered on this podcast a few episodes ago. It's like these things that we have the data, we have the science for, we have the resources to ensure that people have a standard quality of healthcare, and they're just not they're not doing what they need to do to protect the people. And at that point, the lack of policy is I mean, it's a death sentence, like you said, but they're actively saying, you know what, no, you deserve to die.
You deserve to die. It's like, we talk a lot about, the haves and have-nots in the country, right? And we have some baked in, kind of like inequities when it comes to, again, as we're saying, for infrastructure resources. But then some of this is even it's so deliberate when you are reducing funding, when you're shutting down hospitals, when you are taking away funding for projects to give people access to life-saving water, right? You need clean air. You need clean water. You have folks in Alabama and many other rural communities that for decades, they never had clean water.
No.
That is a major issue of environmental justice. And it provides the foundation for why, when you think about this discussion around data centers, if you already have communities who've been left behind, you already have communities who've been dumped on, maybe they have a lot of, polluters that are already
Yeah.
there, right? Why would you bring in operation to add additional burden if they're not going to help be a good neighbor and a good steward? So why would you add an operation that, may, if they're using, gas turbines as their primary fuel source, right? You're burning, gas. That means you're producing combustion
Mm-hmm.
byproducts like particulate matter. For everybody, the audience, that's like dust in the air. So the particles are so small they can get into your bloodstream.
Yeah.
They can impact your brain development, right? They can get in your lung sacs. If you have asthma, it can make your asthma worse, get your asthma attack. If you're older, it can make you more at risk of health issues. If you're a kid, 'cause, kids, if they're outside playing, not online inside all the time, right? They're outside playing. Kids breathe in more air
Yeah.
per kilogram body weight compared to adults. So they're outside playing. You're near these pollution sources. They've been exposed to more pollution, right? So we have to really think about, like, with data centers, the air quality impacts if you're using gas turbines or if you have backup generators. One of the backup generators that are being used on these facilities are diesel generators. Y'all know what happens when you're driving on the road and someone has one of those big trucks and they're
Yes.
burning diesel, right? What they call it, burning coal, or whatever they like start revving up and the boom boom, the zoom zoom zoom, and all
Yes.
the plume, and you don't have you forgot all my vents open, and then your vents open, right? You get all that smoke in your car. That's also some of the same when you combust, whether it be gas, whether it be diesel, you get particulate matter, right? You get nitrogen dioxides, you get sulfur dioxides. No, these are like big names, right? But basically, I'm saying, y'all, you get air pollutants that you're exposed to them, cause asthma attacks, can cause stroke, can cause heart disease, can impact development of, if you're a pregnant woman, can impact the development of the fetus, in your womb. If someone has underlying health issues, right, it can make those health issues worse. Most of these pollutants also can cause cancer.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, that's just on the air pollution side of things. Yeah,
So I'm glad you talk about the adverse health effects that these data centers can have on communities. One thing that I try to do as they're proposing these data centers here in Alabama, I'm trying to point to other places that have had them set up and showing the impacts that it's having on their local communities to show
yeah,
Alabama like these aren't theories that we have proof, we have practical things that we
yeah,
can look at to show what you will be living with if this data center is built and operates in your backyard. And so I'm happy that you brought all of that up because I want to
yeah,
use Boxtown,
yeah,
Tennessee as the
yep,
example. And to everything you just spoke about, you worked in that area, you
yeah,
understand Boxtown better than anyone. So I just want to give you the opportunity to talk about
yeah,
what happened there with the data center and Elon Musk and to people's health.
yeah. So for folks who may not be familiar, let me just even, and you can correct me my facts Chad, we're about to say, but I think
Sure.
nationally there are about 3,000 data centers nationally. I think 3,000. So you want to check my facts? Just fact check me, please, sir.
Checking you right now.
I think the 3,000. Like Data Center Alley, we talked about, that's the one in Virginia. There's about 600 data centers in Virginia. You got the small scale data centers, you got the mom and pop, data centers, right? Oh, you found it, Chad?
Yeah. So it's now approximately upwards of 4,500. So
Oh, okay.
there's
I'm
been
sorry,
more.
y'all. So
So
4,500 data centers now. So 4,500 data centers. So they're expanding across the country. But then you look at you got like this hot super concentration of data centers in Virginia. We call it Data Center Alley, and then you come to Boxtown in Memphis. So in Memphis, you have Boxtown is a historic African American community. Again, I use that term freedmen's community again.
yeah.
It's in Shelby County and in Memphis. And so it's an unincorporated community too. When I use the term unincorporated, I use the term where, so for those of you who don't know what unincorporated means, there's no town council, there's no mayor, right? You really don't have political representation. When it comes to like your political representation, it's your county, okay? But in Boxtown, a Elon Musk was able to build one of his data centers, the Colossus data center in Boxtown. They have, I think, about 35 gas turbines that are being used to power the facility. And so again, when you burn gas, you get a lot of the particulate matter. As I talked before, nitrogen dioxide, you get volatile compounds. We've been able to show high levels of PM, particulate matter, PM 2.5 specifically. So that means that's 2.5 microns. If you put it on like a strand of hair, it could sit on a strand. So that's how small PM 2.5 is. And so we found levels, I think 68% of the time of when we were monitoring above the annual standard for particulate matter. And so what we're seeing is those levels are high, consistently. And so for folks who live in the Boxtown area, that means they've been chronically exposed to high levels of pollutants that can impact their health. In that part of Memphis, and I believe this is correct, I think it has one of the highest cancer rates. So the area that hosts the Colossus One facility, it has one of the highest cancer rates in the country. Okay. And then Colossus 2 is built in South Haven, Mississippi. So I like to say that's metro, how you like metropolitan Memphis. So you got the other, you have, metro areas you can cover, like Philadelphia covers like multiple states, right? Metro Philadelphia. So in Memphis, so South Haven, and they're dealing with Colossus 2. And we had a community meeting about 3 weeks ago where we did a visit to give a report back on some of the data that we collected. To that point. And we had some of the residents from South Haven who came to the community meeting, and they were complaining about the noise pollution,
Mm-hmm.
the big issue with noise pollution. And one of the things I learned from a colleague, so to your point earlier, Chad, in our discussion, you said this is one of the hot topics. I've probably done about 10 podcasts, webinars on data centers in the past 3 months, something like that. I have another one I'm, doing soon, like next week. But one discussion I had recently, and it's not my area, one of the issues with the noise pollution, even if you have barriers put up to block the noise pollution, you have to have the right type of barrier, the right type of material for the right type of noise. So you have low frequency sounds are problematic at night. So even if you have a physical barrier, that's not gonna prevent the noise pollution exposure because
Yeah.
it's low frequency. So that's just something I learned recently. That's not my area. Like, okay, wow. So we have to make sure we have the right mitigation solution for the right problem. So the physical barriers that we're using are not the right mitigation solution to deal with the low frequency hum that
Yeah.
folks are experiencing.
Yeah, they're about 20 minutes south of here in Birmingham. They're trying to build this massive multi-billion-dollar data center right next to a humane society and an elementary school. And
Yeah,
then I know in Nashville, I just saw on the news yesterday or something that they're proposing
yeah,
one that's near the zoo, and it's like, what I put a lot of thought into this, and where my mind is going
yeah,
is that there is absolutely no regulation to
yeah,
stop this. And so it's the Wild West, and they're trying to take advantage of the fact that there is no regulation, because what we know is
yeah.
these corporations will sell us out for $1.
Yeah, I've been said it, man. You just hit the nail on the head. Like it's the wild wild west development right now when it comes to data
Yes,
centers. You really need. I think you need federal regulations
for
to kind of
sure.
create bounds for it. And let me say this: I'm not, because for those who are listening, I'm Gen X, right? So I remember the internet was like 1993, 1994. Like, what's
Sure.
this new thing? Going to A&M, you had that one computer in the lab you with it had internet, and it was like so cool. It's so new, right? And so technology is great. We're like, this is like part of this. I'm like Industrial Revolution 2.0 or 3.0. Technology is great, and I'm not saying that advancements in technology are a problem, but there are concerns with AI as relates to algorithm bias, right? folks are concerned about
Yeah.
that. Folks are concerned about 1984 and the monitoring state, security state. We are kind of already in there and how it can be abused, right? Folks are concerned about generative AI and how it's being used and so like the extractive economy, that part, and then also the benefits of AI as technology for everybody. So as the internet's here, internet's here, and we've adopted, and it's been very good for society. AI has potential to have some be useful for society. Now you're seeing a lot of young people, Gen Z, Gen A people who are really against AI, and you've seen this on the news, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But we have to make sure that we're doing things the right way. So this transitions back to the data center. So I talked about the air pollution issues. I talked about some of the noise pollution issues. I was in a meeting recently, Chad, in Charles County, Maryland. There's a lot of debate and discussion about data centers. I was in a meeting, this week, and people were really concerned about how it's going to impact their families, how it's going to impact their kids. I talked about Ninja that Ninja community I mentioned earlier. That's in Charles County. They're really concerned about water quality. You got people who they're already having issues with their wells. One person mentioned
Yeah.
that they're already digging a well. They have to go deeper. So what does it mean for that aquifer if it's going to be shared water between those data centers and the residents? What does it mean for folks who already have water quality issues? Think about the thermal pollution. You think about the fact that you may be recycling gray water. What that means is when if it gets discharged, if it's not a closed system, right? So they're keeping the water in a closed system. So you got the option between, are you going to cool the servers, the chips using AC, or are you going to cool it with water? Either way, someone's impacted, right? Whether it be the water, the aquifer, the groundwater issues. If you're using air conditioning, okay, are you using your own power? You have your own grid, right? Or you using gas turbines?
And
Are
what
you
we're
using
seeing
renewables?
and what we're seeing in a place like Alabama is they don't have their own grids. They're being subsidized from the major utility companies, which is going to put a burden even more on people who already cannot afford their power bills.
Exactly. So that was one of the big issues that came up in Charles County. Yeah, I've heard story after story about people concerned about as a ratepayer. I believe the stat is, and you can correct me on this fact,
Yeah.
$10 to $15 per month increase for folks in the state of Maryland. I think it's in the state of Maryland when it comes to their energy bill. I believe in Virginia, they said that 40% of the energy demand, I think either last year or this year, came from data centers.
Yeah.
40%.
Yes. I read that this
40%.
week.
Yeah, so you have that. So good. So you think about if you're going back to the earlier point about like poverty, not having access to infrastructure, not having access to so not having access to infrastructure. If you have folks who are already poor and live in these areas where you have a proposed data center, and to your point, you got people already having to choose between: am I paying for my medicine? Am I paying for my food? I'm gonna be paying for my energy bill. Folks are already dealing with energy poverty issues. So
Yes.
as ratepayers,
Yes.
why are we subsidizing? We should not be. Let me just like this is maybe a different kind of comparison. In the same way, people should be up in arms with major sports stadiums, and you have the taxpayers paying for. No, why should I pay for you to build out your stadium?
Yeah.
You should pay for that. In
Exactly.
the same way, if you want to come into the community as a data center, you should pay for your own grid. You should be using renewables. Think about this fact, Chad, and just the listeners. So you talk about AI, all the technology of tomorrow, right? But we're using the power of yesterday, right? With technology of today and tomorrow. But you're using coal fire. If you're on our grid, right? And that grid, they have a coal-fired power plant. The technology of the 21st, 22nd century, the technology of the Jetsons. That's used for those who know the cartoon Jetsons, right? I'm aging myself, right? And y'all can get this comparison. For those who are Gen X or older, we talk about technology of the Jetsons, but using when it comes to AI, but we're using for our power, we're using the Flintstones power source.
That's
Y'all get my point.
perfect. Yes. Yes. That is perfect. It's insane. And one thing that we've talked about a lot, not specifically on the podcast, but on the social media handles that has
Yes, sir.
reached hundreds of thousands of people in the South, has to do with the fact that, like, say, Alabama Power, right? They have not been audited since 1980. So we
That's
don't
crazy.
We don't know what's in their books. We don't know what they are passing down to the ratepayer. So they're
Yeah.
making these deals with these data centers, and they're being subsidized, but there's no clear way for us to know, well, how much of that is being passed on the ratepayer on top of people already having $1,200 power bills in a month for a one-bedroom apartment. People are
Did
literally.
you say 1,200 a month?
Oh, I have the DMs of the bills from people who
Oh
have
my God.
reached out to me asking for help. Yes.
Chet, I mean, I was complaining about we had a bill that was pretty high, but that's for a one bedroom apartment. That's crazy. We have a four bedroom house.
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense.
I
So that means
had
that's the system's broken, Chad.
Yes, yes, it absolutely is. I had a one-bedroom apartment, one bed, one bath apartment, about a year ago when I was living in that apartment. My apartment never reached over 55 degrees in the winter because it was just like the heat was constantly on a really low
Yeah.
setting. My power bill January 2025 was over $550 for that one bedroom. Um,
Wow.
and then I made a video about it, and then people were, I guess, having the same experience, but they were looking for someone to talk about it because no one was publicly bringing awareness to it. And so that's how I got started talking about power utilities and companies and the
Yeah.
Public Service Commission and the importance of trying to elect people who will hold your utilities accountable. Um,
Exactly.
so anywho, that's a topic for another day.
I know,
What
but
I
it's important, but it's important part of the discussion about what people actually like. How is it impacting me every day? Like, these issues, how does it impact? I always talk about when we're going to address problems, we got to make it every day. We got to make it proximate. We got to make it pocketable. How is it impacting my family? How's it impacting my health? How's it impacting my job? Right?
Yeah.
Those are things that are important to folks. So if people are suffering already from high energy costs, right? And we've actually removed some of those support mechanisms,
Hmm.
like some of the funding in the previous administration, Inflation Reduction Act. There were some dollars out there; those dollars are gone.
Yeah.
So what are
Yeah.
we going to do? So as a taxpayer, why don't you subsidize me? Don't subsidize a company that's going to making
Yep.
billions. You should
Yep.
be subsidizing the people. I mean, it's so that's also part of the problem. Like this system's been flipped. We have given. We're not focusing enough on the people who are struggling. We're not focusing on the people who we know who need support. We're not listening to people. And let's say this, y'all. I'm not saying that I'm against technology, and folks are not against opportunity, but making sure we have the opportunity not just for jobs and growth, but the opportunities to make sure I can take care of my kid, my mother, my sick family member. That I don't have to choose between being in an environment where I have a data center and they're using our water, and then I don't have water to feed my baby because my baby needs
Yes.
formula.
Yes, 110%. You're not wrong about that. One thing I want to ask you about though is we know that there are supposed to be at the federal level regulations on the like the gases and the environmental impact that these data centers are having, but we're seeing that none of them are being enforced, and actually the agencies that are supposed to be enforcing them are being gutted. I want you to speak to the regulatory environment in
Yes,
which
sir.
these facilities are supposed to be operating in, but are bypassing and being able to just like wreak havoc on our environment. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think with the current administration, that's been a major framing right. We want to make it easier for businesses to do business. So you've had streamlining of permitting processes. You have something called a National Environmental Policy Act that's supposed to, if you have a facility that may have environmental impacts, to say this in a simple way, that you're supposed to do an environmental impact assessment. But a lot of those things have been kind of rolled back. There's been a lot of fast tracking of facilities for growth and development at the federal EPA. There's been rollbacks of the Clean Air Act. There's been rollbacks of various standards that just make it harder for regular folks, everyday people, to be protected from pollution. So when you have so you have the combination of the rollbacks of federal regulations and the gutting to your point of the workers, the staff, the workforce, then in many ways you have nobody at the will at the federal level. I mean, that's one way to frame it. And then when you come down the state local level, then you have to lean in more at the state level to see legislation passed. And there's no active legislation being passed in the state to provide those protections. So, for example, in the state of Virginia, and you can look at this up, just correct me on this. I believe this past session they had about 76 bills on data centers.
Okay.
Um, and the state of either 46 or 76. I know there's a big difference between 46 and 76. So please check my numbers on data centers. And they have a lot of data centers too. Now, in the state of Maryland, there were several bills on data centers in our session. So you have at the state level, trying to have some protections, making sure the data centers have their own grid, that they're not being subsidized, that the ratepayer protections, like affordability has been a big issue in discussions in the state of Maryland around data centers, energy affordability in general, but making sure data centers do not, add to the affordability issue.
Hmm.
So you have that point. So in Alabama, I'm not sure, is there any action happening
No,
to, yeah,
no.
yeah.
So
So,
just to give you your fact check, Virginia lawmakers considered 61 bills related to
oh,
data
61
centers.
bills.
15 were passed and sent to the governor, and then the remaining 46 are being held for the 2027 legislative session. And then
That's
in
why that 46
Alabama,
came in. Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
in Alabama, we have there are no regulations, there are no bills being introduced. They were focusing on, in my opinion, the wrong things as they do this last legislative session, to the point where our Democratic lieutenant governor candidate Phil Ensler, who was a representative in the House, is one of the only candidates running for office who's speaking about data centers and the impact that they're going to have on rural communities and the people who are in the near vicinity of
Yep.
a data center. And what he's calling for is a blanket moratorium
Needs to be more. Yeah.
on data centers until they can figure out the proper regulations to put into place, because exactly what we said, he
Yep.
is campaigning on this idea, on this fact that Alabama is trying to take advantage of this Wild West effect with data
Yep.
centers. And so, yeah, it's the fact that we actually have no regulations or laws on the books for them. He's just calling for a blanket moratorium to put a stop on their production until we can get a handle
Yeah.
on them properly.
I think that's a good approach. And so I talked about Charles County in Maryland. In Prince County, where I live in Maryland, we have a moratorium on data centers that led to a task force to develop a report on data centers. But in that task force report, they didn't talk about any environmental health issues. They didn't talk about air quality. They didn't talk about water quality impacts. They didn't talk about energy impacts on ratepayers. Why would they? The task force was like, hey, we want to make it sound like it's great because it's an
Yeah.
economic opportunity. And so we actually had to develop a counter report to the county's task force report, to say, hey, here are the things that you should be doing when it comes to data centers. You should have a commission to review any data center proposals. You should make sure that there's more focus on air quality impacts. That you have some things in there to protect ratepayers. That you more around mitigation. You have a strong. If you're going to have data centers, you have strong community benefits agreement to make sure you maximize the benefits for communities and you minimize the harm. One of the things that we also recommended is that if you're going to bring a data center in, it's if you have think about again AI. For those who love sci-fi, you old head, go back to old school folks. Terminator, right? I mean, that's like the bad side of it.
Yeah.
But so the Demolition Man, all these movies that talked about things that we're seeing now with Demolition Man or other movies like self-driving cars, good things. And we have some really great technological innovations, but the Terminator is a really bad example. That's Skynet. I don't want to scare people with the Skynet example, right? But we talk about all this futuristic technology, but we have to have the right. If it's so futuristic, it's supposed to be so great. Why are we using gas turbines? Why would we have backup diesel generators? Why are they going to be using our water? So you talk about so advanced, but really some of the approaches that are being used to build the data centers and how they're going to be, maintained, and operated, they're actually not advanced technologies. So that there's like this again, this is mismatch between the rhetoric and the narrative and the reality.
Yeah.
So if you have a data center come into community, it should be a zero emission data center. It should be a closed system. They shouldn't be using the community's water. They should not be on the grid. They should have their own grid. They have their own grid. They should be using renewables. They should be using solar and wind and geothermal, other approaches, and not using, pollution intensive, 19th century technologies that we use for, steamships, right?
Yep.
It's 2026. You should not be using coal. You should not be using gas if you're in advanced technology. So just kind of go back to what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing from folks. Chad, folks are scared. They're worried
Yeah.
again about their water. They're worried about their families. People are talking about they're worried about their ability to hunt and like just the ability to enjoy nature. Folks are super concerned about noise pollution and the fact that scientifically, for those of you who may not know, noise pollution can impact your circadian rhythms. Noise
Yep.
pollution can increase stress. And you have stress hormones like cortisol and C-reactive protein. Yeah, I may have heard those before, but it increases your stress, increases your anxiety, increases your fight or flight, which it lead to more oxidation and inflammation in your body, which can lead to things like heart disease, right? Can lead to chronic health issues, can lead to you dying just from noise pollution, can stress you out to lead to you having a lower life expectancy. That's a problem.
Sounds very pro-life to me in the red state of Alabama. Like,
Exactly. Yes, sir.
Jesus, that sarcasm for the
I
people
got you. I
listening
got you, Chad.
who are my haters. Um,
I
so
got you, Chad.
what I'm curious about is what would an ethically and morally just data center policy look like, and have we seen any implemented in the U.S.? Because so far, this might be ignorance on my part, but the only kind of stories that I'm seeing that's stopping data centers are people themselves. It's not actual policy being put forth. So is there policy that we should be looking to in other states to implement and advocate for here, say in Alabama, or even in Georgia, where in Morgan County,
Yeah.
where you see mud coming through the pipes because they've completely ruined the water system? What can we look into?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not as aware of, like great, sort of best practice policies that are out there. I know in many of the, at least in the Charles County, Princeton County examples I provided earlier,
Yep.
we've talked about, and also I'll go back to Memphis real quickly too. We talked about, maybe you need to have like a data center ordinance. We talked about the setback distances, the buffer zones. In the Charles County discussion of the other night, there were folks talked about buffers and setbacks, but it was said, oh, we're gonna have a 500-foot buffer. But because of noise pollution, like that, the hum, people could hear the hum a mile, and somebody said 5 miles away. So that's not
Yeah.
gonna be enough, right? If you're gonna deal with a low frequency, you have to have a different physical barrier to deal with the low frequency. I'm gonna call it the hum again for everybody who's out there, right? So, but I would say, some of the approaches you can take is to make sure you have data centers, some type of data center language to protect the people built into the comprehensive plans and the master plan. So don't let them change your zoning for data centers. If you want to really protect yourselves, like, your comprehensive plan is very important. Like, what's the plan for your community? It should be protecting your safety, health, and welfare, and having language about data centers like any other type of development that could have adverse effects on the environment and human health. That's a place to start, right? I would also say that addressing issues around energy affordability is another place to start. And I think there's been some laws they're trying to pass in Maryland, also Virginia, around that.
Yep.
I think in our region, PJM is like the regional utility group, really more guidance and more accountability from PJM and how data centers are being brought into whatever your regional utility space. I was in a conversation recently, and some folks made an interesting argument about, the benefits of AI and data centers from an infrastructure perspective.
Yeah.
They stated that, you should look at data centers as the value proposition of how they can come in and upgrade your infrastructure. So you may be in a rural community that has a rural utility where you have issues with lines are old, the infrastructure is not up to date, and so that data center could be a resource that can help improve that. I think it's a good thing, but but what are the costs that come along with that?
Yep.
So they
Yep.
are updating your infrastructure, right? they cannot be impacting your water quality. They cannot be impacting your air quality. Okay.
Yeah. It sounds like from what you just laid out that it sounds so redundant to say get out and vote, but genuinely
Yeah.
vote
No.
for your local commissions and city council to make sure that your county has regulations on zoning. That's one thing
Yep.
in Birmingham and
Yep.
Montgomery and in rural counties in Alabama, that they're allowing these things to happen, and these people are showing up to town meetings, and the town is saying, you know what? We actually have no jurisdiction over the zoning. So therefore, so it sounds like it needs to be a full court press. Like, make sure that you are informed on your local races, your state races of electing senators and congressmen
Yep.
who are talking about this, to make sure that every level of government is covered from a policy standpoint.
Exactly. So you didn't so ask them, where do they stand on data centers? What's their plan for data centers, right?
Yeah.
And so when it comes, and to your point, do not sleep on those local elections. So
No.
sometimes we get all like focused only on the state, or of course when it's presidential, but yeah, like those down ballot, like who's running. If you elect your planning board, your planning commissioners, those are super important positions, because
Yes.
planning is where it's at, everybody. When it comes to your emergency services, when it comes to fire and police, when it comes to where schools go, it's really about planning and zoning. So you really should be doing a full court press, and so voting and attending your local zoning board meeting, attending your local planning board meeting, talking to your county council, said, what are your plans for data centers? What do you stand? Because what's also happened in many of these conversations and communities across that I've been engaging, there's been NDAs that have been signed between the data center developers and the people in power.
Yeah.
And I'm not gonna bemoan the fact or beat up folks about signing the NDAs. I know there's some proprietary reasons why they do that on one hand, but on the other hand, it limits the opportunity for the local residents to understand what's happening, and it impacts their constitutional right to petition for
Yeah.
getting information, right? And
Yeah.
so there's some conflict tension with NDA. So more transparency from local leadership is really important, but definitely, people should vote. Have them
Mhm.
get on the record like what their plans are. Have them get on the record to know how they're going to address the issue. And then in some cases, Chad, in some communities, yes, your planning commission may be elected, but sometimes they're appointed. So
Yeah.
think about, you have a planning commission that's appointed. That's actually not representative justice. That's not representing democracy, because I didn't vote you in. Somebody appointed you. So who are you beholden to when it comes to accountability?
Dr. Wilson, I have to fill you in on this, because this is you hit you hit the nail on the head with
No.
that comment, because the Public Service Commission in Alabama, like I told you, and I have to insert an apology to my audience here because they hear me talk about this all the time. They're probably getting annoyed with me hearing it again,
Got
um,
you.
but well, the Public Service Commission in Alabama, like I said, they have not held a rate review for Alabama Power since in 1982, I believe. It's been well over 40 years. And
Yeah.
so we're doing a lot of advocacy in the fall on that fact, on Alabama
Yeah.
Power, on the rate review, on the importance of the Public Service Commission. So then people are running for the Public Service Commission. It's the most competitive race for the Public Service Commission that we have seen in decades, right?
Yeah.
So the Democratic candidates announce that they're going to run, and they announce their platforms end of January. On my birthday,
Hmm.
beginning of February, they announced a bill to remove the Public Service Commission from the ballot this cycle, to make it appointed by the governor. So
No.
then people were fed up, because that was silencing the will of the people, right? It's
Exactly.
removing their accountability. So their then solution that they passed, that they have now put into law, and there's one of the candidates that has filed a federal lawsuit on this, is that no, we still get to elect 3 public service commissioners, right? But the
Yeah.
governor gets to appoint 5.
You
And
stacking. That's
then
still not fair. You're stacking the
exactly.
deck.
Exactly. And then the Public Service Commission will be under
That's
the
crazy.
guise or the guidance and leadership of an energy secretary who has control of the Public Service Commission agenda that is appointed by the governor. So in order to, I'm not even going to say anything else, because you get what I'm saying.
No, I know you may say some bad words. I would say that all that still is violation of our constitutional rights. I
Yeah.
mean, for petitioning, I mean, First Amendment rights as well. I believe that could be some Amendment issues in there as well. And so I don't. That sounds very probably, but it also it sounds like a typical playbook of a power grab. That's what
Yes.
it sounds like.
That's
We're talking about power when it comes to energy, right? But it's also talking about power, the power of the people, and it's taking away the power of the people. Why would I let you vote for you if you're gonna set up something where you basically creating like a I don't know, I'm not saying an oligarchy, but that type of power that's residing in one or two people. That's not how
exactly.
democracy works.
Exactly, exactly. The energy utilities are so angry that their handpicked people aren't going to be on the commission, and that the people had the power, and it truly was a power grab. They were silencing the will of the people, and they're trying to stay in power. And this is a classic move that you see take place in places like Alabama to ensure that these corporations can continue to have a guaranteed profit every year. Alabama Power is a part of the Southern Company, which is
Yep.
Mississippi, Georgia, Alabama. We are 16% of their customer base, but we account for, I believe, up to 34% of their profit. It makes, when you look at it that way, it makes sense why they'd go to do all these lengths to try to silence the will of the people.
Yeah, we want to make sure that we need y'all to keep. Sorry, we need y'all to keep subsidizing us, basically. That's what's happening. So, and that gets back to my point about the haves and have-nots. So, yeah, the haves are these corporations, and then
Yeah.
treating the residents of Alabama as have-nots. But again, to your earlier point about voting, people have power. You have to vote for you have, and this is the thing: when you vote, I always say the make the marks work, it takes work. Voting is only one part of it. After you vote, you also have to show up the next day. I've got you in now. What are you going to do the next
Yeah.
week, the next month, right? To hold folks accountable. So
Yep.
I think that's part of old school civics. Let's get back to being more civically engaged. And I think this issue of data centers is an issue that cuts across so many lines, racial lines, economic lines,
1000%.
right? Folks want to be able to hunt and fish. Folks don't want that mess with their vistas. They don't want to hear that noise pollution, right? You can't have a data center by a school, man. Come on, y'all.
Yeah.
You how you gonna take care? How you gonna take care of your kids? Talking about the next generation, the children of the future. Teach them well. I mean, Whitney Houston, let them lead the way. But how they gonna lead the way? They've been exposed to air pollutants that can impact the ability to learn and concentrate and focus. So just for the audience, I know I gave a little Whitney Houston reference there, but when you think about if you're burning diesel or you're burning gas, one that sets of combustion byproducts of volatile organic compounds. Y'all know the VOCs, that new car smell, hold your breath, or formaldehyde. Y'all know formaldehyde, right?
Yep.
When kids are exposed to VOCs, it impacts their concentration, focus, and ability to learn. So you cannot put these operations by children.
Already in places that don't provide free school lunches or meals to students in rural impoverished areas where that their families are struggling to get by, and they might not eat when they go home, and that's already a big issue for a lot of
They
students
already
because that
stress.
ruins their focus in school. So they're
Yeah,
already education's
they're
being
going to school
impacted.
hungry. Yeah, they're
Yes,
going to school hungry and they're being exposed to air pollution that also impacts their ability to learn. Come on, y'all. We got to do better.
it's
I'm
awful.
just saying. Just saying.
It's awful. Yeah. What? So we're rounding out the episode. What is one thing that you want the audience to take away and that they can do today to push back against what we see happening with these data centers across the country?
I think you gotta show up and show out when it comes to voting, right? Show up at the polls and vote, and then folks are not doing what they want you to do. You want them to do. You show up and show them out. That's what you got to do. Either so you
Yep.
got to vote. I mean, your vote counts. When you don't vote, it counts. When you do vote, it counts. Okay,
Yeah.
so folks have to vote. You have to get more engaged. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity with AI and data center if done right, but if done poorly, and then getting back to this whole environmental justice framing that we talked about before. There's this whole term about sacrifice zones, how some communities get used as places where you put all the bad stuff, none of the good stuff. So they get all the incinerators, they get all the power plants, they get all the highways and byways, but they don't get the good stuff. We call those sacrifice zones.
Mm.
We talk about toxic trauma, been exposed to. I mean, think about if you've been exposed to air pollution every day. You basically been poisoned every day. Okay, so that's a sacrifice zone, right? We could end up creating digital sacrifice zones,
Mm.
and we shouldn't do that. So to stop that from happening, please vote.
Amen. Dr. Sacoby Wilson, final question. What is it that you're not wrong about? Let's hear it.
So one of the things I'm not wrong about, you got to grow your own food. As someone who I went to Alabama A&M, I'm a big fan of Tuskegee University in Alabama. I'm a big fan of Booker T. Washington. I'm a big fan. I joke a lot about I'm in my Booker T. Washington Little House on the Prairie mode. I am growing my own food. Okay, I got growing all kinds of greens. I mean, food is hot, folks. If you want to be able to survive this economic downturn and the high food prices, grow your own food.
Yes.
That's growing your own food is power, is better for you and your family. I think it's really important for folks to be able to have food sovereignty. It would be great to have we can get to the point that we're growing up so much food in rural areas and doing so much urban ag and regenerative agriculture that you don't have to go to a grocery store.
I'm so happy that's what you're not wrong about, because this week at that conference in DC that I was
Yeah,
telling you about, I went into it. I knew no one.
yeah,
I wanted to go and learn, but it was this big networking opportunity, and there was a really big influencer who was there, and her name is
yeah.
Brianna Bosch. Her name on Instagram is Blossom and Branch Farm, and she is
Okay.
all about regenerative gardening
Yep.
and farming, and she owns a farm in Colorado, and she teaches you how to use what you have to grow your own food. I'm so inspired. I literally told my boyfriend last night that
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
my balcony, I'm going to try to use my space to start growing my own vegetables based on what Bree taught me this week and what her is on her social media. So I just want to like shamelessly plug her as a resource.
I get so excited. I mean, dude, I could talk about food. You asked me. I was like, I talk about food all day. I loved growing food. Also last year for the first time, I've been growing food for a long time in my house in Bowie, Maryland, right? But for last year, for the first time, I did apple butter and apple jam. I did fig jam, man. Dude, I made elderberry jam, elderberry syrup, elderberry syrup. Yesterday, I picked a whole quart, oh not quart, a whole liter, about liter, a whole liter of gooseberries. I got gooseberries growing in my front yard. I got gooseberries, blackberries, strawberries. I got what's I got? Raspberries. I also have muscadine grapes, or really scuppernongs for those of you from the South. Y'all know the scuppernongs, right?
Yep.
I got scuppernongs growing on my patio. I got a patio deck that's I call it for plants, not people. I have about 60 pots of tomatoes on my patio deck right now.
Yeah.
I have a row of apple trees. Dude, I have everything but a cow and a chicken and some bees in my garden.
And we will work on getting you those. Listen, there is something empowering about in a day and time where we have control over so little, and it takes so many people using a collective voice to move the needle
Yeah,
just a little bit. There is something empowering about being able to look at your own space and to say, you know what, I do have control of growing my own food and making sure that I at least have the nourishment that I need to live a healthy
yep,
life to stay in this fight. So I'm so appreciative that that's what you're not wrong about. I'm so appreciative for all that you have done, that you continue to do. I'm so appreciative that you came on this podcast to educate my audience on a very real threat that we are finding in our backyards here in Alabama and across the South. I can't thank you enough for your time. Thank you so much, Dr. Wilson.
thank you, Jed. It's been great conversation.